Hi, Franziska. How are you today?
Hello, Eloise. Thank you. Very good. And you?
Great. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for asking.
yeah,
I'm good. Thank you
yeah.
for meeting with me today. It's
Yes, thank you for
really nice.
inviting me.
Yes,
Yeah.
my pleasure. It's such a great way for me, at least, to start the day. So,
Yes.
could you please introduce yourself for our audience and let us know a bit about your services as well as a
Yes.
expat coach?
Yes. Well, my name is Franziska Luxhøj. I'm originally from Austria, but I'm married to a Dane, so hence the Danish last name and the German first name. And yeah, we've been together for almost 20 years, and we've also lived together in Denmark and the Netherlands for most of that time. So for me, it was really a long time of living abroad, and I've been through some of these struggles of adaptation, learning to be happy and to truly feel like yourself and authentically yourself in a foreign country. And that's what I've made my mission and passion also now, to help others achieve the same. And I do that as an expat happiness coach, where I really focus on helping people to find what makes them happy, because I think a happy life looks different for everyone. It might look different for for you, for me, for anyone else. And so I work as a coach, and also a couple of years ago I started collaborating more with other providers in the area who do something similar, or who have important knowledge that can help expats and internationals thrive. And I provide that knowledge, or collect the different experts on the field, in my Happy Abroad Summit, which is an online conference.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I was actually looking through also your Instagram page, which is full
Yes.
of really good resources. And you explained very well a phenomenon of identity crisis that I was actually just
Mm.
talking about with a friend and over expat coach on a previous video. But you explained very well as like going from that surface level of traits of identification, where I am from, where I live, etc., from more
Mm.
value-based self traits of identification.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering, what would you? I feel like I've been through this a little bit because I'm an expat myself, but I was wondering, what would you say to someone who is trying to prepare themselves for their first move abroad? Is there a way to prepare to that phenomenon of identity crisis, so to speak, or is it possible to anticipate it, or do you just have to go through it and figure it out on
Yeah.
the go?
Yeah, I think the first step always is to not underestimate the impact that an international move has, because in that phase of planning, when we're usually excited and we're looking forward to something. We expect an adventure and a lot of new experiences. And we also have that when we arrive. I mean, there are also challenges, logistical challenges and practical challenges, and they usually fill up a lot of our time, but they don't fill up so much of our mental resources. But in that busy phase of arriving, and then we have the honeymoon phase, we often forget what the impact can be, or we underestimate what the impact can be. And a move means a lot of changes at once. So you have different life changes, like you move from one house to another, and even from one country to another. You maybe quit a job and start a new job. Some people also get married in that transition because their reason for moving is to be together. So there are a lot of life changes happening at once, and those mean stress, and they have an impact, and they also leave us questioning ourselves. Okay, so who am I? Because also those life changes mean that we lose a lot of these common things that we use to identify who we are. So when we introduce ourselves, often we say, yeah, I'm from this and that country, I have this and that job, I have this and that family, and I spend time with these friends. So we use external factors to define who we are. And that's where I think it becomes difficult when you move abroad, because a lot of these external factors, they break away. Like obviously you don't live the same place anymore, you live in a new country, you probably have changed job, or have lost your job or given up your job, your career, that's when it especially hits hard, this identity crisis. You don't have as much contact with your family, your friends. Maybe you've been part of a running club or some other, like a gym or something. You also don't have that, and we don't consciously use it to identify who we are, but I think unconsciously we do a lot. So when we lose all of that, it can leave us very lost and questioning, who am I? And in that context, I think it's very important to become clear on who am I deep within, like who am I? What are my dreams? What are my passions? What are my values? What makes me independent of which company I work for or which job I have or where I live, and so on. And the preparation phase, I mean, you can already start reflecting on that before you move abroad. Like, what is your dream? What is your intention with moving abroad? What would your ideal life in that new country look like? How can you live up to your values and make sure that you live a life that's aligned with your values? So a lot of these reflections, you can do them beforehand. And my experience is very few people do, because we underestimate the impact. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's very true. I thought I was moving to Canada from France, and I thought, oh, it's the similar type of culture. It will be fun. I was just completely excited as well. And exactly everything you described. At first, you're very busy. There's the honeymoon phase of the new country. And then you start reaching this deeper question. And I think it's, of course, you can fully prepare in advance. But of course, if you can at least just be aware that it is something that happens, and start having this deeper conversation with yourself as soon as possible. And also, once you're abroad, it's okay to reach for help, and also being close to the expat community. I think I realized, because when I moved here, at first I was like, I'm abroad to be immersed in a new country, so I want to be with Canadians, I want to be with over locals, and of course, that's the dynamic. That's usually why you go in a new country. You want to know that culture. But I had underestimated as well how impactful and supportive it can be to surround yourself from people from your own culture or from other expats. And
exactly, who gets you, who know what you're going through, and who you might be able to talk to about your struggles, because that's something that, well, the local population cannot relate. If they've never lived abroad, they can't. And also your family back home might not be able to relate. They might think, oh, you're living this amazing, exciting life. You just moved to a new country, and they expect you to have fun. And yes, it is fun, and it is also challenging. I think you just mentioned something really important, and that's asking for help is okay. We should not put the stigma on asking for help, and that can be friends and new acquaintances who are also expats, or coaches or counselors, or there's a lot of help to get out there. And I think asking for help and being patient with ourselves, having compassion, like giving ourselves also time to settle and to find our standing in that new environment, I think is really important.
Find our new identity, or discover what it was all this time. And if we just shift a little bit to someone who has already moved abroad, they have heard of this phenomenon through this conversation over conversation, so they know that it's normal to struggle a little bit for a certain period of time, but they still, even though they understand that it's normal that it's happening, they don't really know how to reach that next phase of, okay, now this is the new me, this is my, I'm going to define myself. So vast topic, but I was wondering if we could get maybe some tips that you give to the people you work with, how to get to that redefined identity, how to get there.
Yeah. Well, it's like the elements I mostly work with in that context is to create a vision, like a future perspective, so that you can get meaning. I think to find meaning with what we are doing is really important, because if it feels meaningless, we also feel lost. So if you have this future perspective, that gives us meaning. The second pillar, so to say, is values, really being clear on your values. And here I typically go very deep, not like, okay, because if someone hasn't worked with values before and reflected deeply on values, often we say, oh, what's important to me? Yeah, family and health, and yes, it is, but what's the underlying? Usually there is something we can go deeper. So what about family? What does it give you? And then asking this what else question a couple of times, can be 5 times, can be 10 times, and maybe journal about it, write it down, because that takes you a level that is much deeper, that really then talks about what is it about family, what is it about health that's really, really important to you. And I think then being aware of, okay, so in this new country, how can I live my values? What does that look like? And is it possible in that culture that I'm in right now? Yeah. And the third part is strengths, because if you know what your strengths are, and here I work with a model from positive psychology that's called character strengths, and those are really traits that are inside of you. It doesn't have to do with education or what you've learned in life. It's really who you are as a person. So there are some innate strengths that we all have, and the more we live up to them, the more we live aligned to them, the more we use, like the more we do activities and work from that place of strength, the lighter we feel and the more in flow we feel. And that also makes life, well, easier and more enjoyable. And of course, we can also push ourselves and then work on things that we're not so good, or maybe, well, yeah, do the things that we need to get done. But even here, we can sometimes tweak it so that we can approach things from a strengths perspective. And so these three elements, I think, are really key on having clarity on, and then also really designing your life in a way so that it's aligned with what you got to learn about yourself, because that makes life just, yeah, easier and more enjoyable and happier. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, I really like that last part about working on your strength. I think that's something that really worked for me back in 2019, was to someone who told me, like, you're always in control of your narrative. Sure, you're not in control of every external events, but you're in control of the narrative.
Yes.
So that's what is going with me when you're talking about building your strength and focusing on transforming your strength.
Yeah, this narrative part is really interesting also. Right? There is this quote that says, it's never too late to have a good childhood. And it's really like, if you feel that you didn't have a good childhood, or that you had a really challenging childhood, you can always go back and then maybe turn it around by shifting your perspective, by making a few reframes, and it doesn't change whatever happened. And yes, there bad things happen to some people, and I don't want to say that I don't want to make it smaller than it is, because some people go through bad things. But I really like that quote anyway, because it's a lot of it is about the narrative, and it's about what you tell yourself about what happened that makes a big difference.
Thank you for sharing. And another question was, when we're struggling abroad, how do we know if we should push through, so to speak, continue working on it, or if there's a moment when we should move back? Personally, to share just a little bit of my own piece of experience, I think I've noticed a pattern, because I used to live in the south of France and I moved to Paris when I was very young. Then I moved from France to Canada. I think it's very down to earth, but one of the tips that I'm giving to myself at this point is a 2-year time frame, because you're also saying, give it time, be patient with yourself. It's not all going to be fine overnight. And I think just recreating your own roots, your own base in a new location takes time. So I think for me personally at this point, it's very down to earth, but I'm giving myself about 2 years to give it a real chance to a place. But either time frame or any kind of other tips, how do you help people decide if they should continue trying and trying, or if they should maybe move back?
Yeah. I think it's an evaluation that again has to do a lot with the values, because there might be cultures which are just a clash. So if you're really big on like equality, gender equality, and you live in a country where that's absolutely not the case, it might be very, very challenging for you to live in that country and to accept the facts. So I think there are a few factors that definitely make it more challenging or even impossible for you to live there. I think it's an evaluation of, can I design a life for myself here with intention that is aligned with who I am so that I can thrive, or do I not see that option? Because if you absolutely don't see that option, I think it's time to reconsider. And that said, sometimes it might not be possible to leave the country, because there are situations where maybe you're married, maybe you have children, maybe you're in an intercultural relationship, and then you just have to make it work. And I think if the situation is you just have to make it work for whichever reason, I think learning the skill of reframing is super, super important, because if there are factors that you cannot change, it's important to learn tools to accept them, to be able to accept them, and their reframing is really important skill to learn. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's actually a really great segue to a question that I had for you about supporting couples with two different nationalities, two different cultures. It's obviously can be amazing, and that's why some people actually fall in love in the first place, but it can also be sometimes a struggle. So how do you and I know it's always very big questions and we don't have that much time, but in a few tips answer, how do you kind of help people to make these cultural differences an asset and not an obstacle?
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that in the beginning it might be why you fall in love, because I think that's also, I just recently took an extra training that's in positive intelligence, and here one of the frameworks that we work with is saboteurs and knowledge about the different saboteurs we all have. And what's explained there is that often we fall for someone who has very opposite saboteurs, and we find that cute in the beginning. So someone who is very structured and has a control, like really wants to be in control all the time, might fall for someone who is the exact opposite, who is very fun-loving, who has this who is maybe a bit messy. And it's a refreshing idea in the beginning, but actually living together is really hard in that context. And what this positive intelligence approach then teaches is that how saboteurs often get a hold of us. And once we are in saboteur mode, we only see the negative. We see what's wrong. And that can very well apply to intercultural relationships as well. So you might, I don't know, if you have someone from Northern Europe and someone from Southern Europe, there are a lot of cultural differences. And yes, in saboteur mode we then only see the bad things, and it's really important then to activate that other region in our brain also. So it's also based on neuroscience, where the thriving brain really has its own region, and the survivor brain, where the saboteurs live, has its own region. And there are tools that we can learn that help us get back to that brain, to that brain part that makes us see things in a more helpful light, in a more constructive light. So I think it's a lot of working with yourself first, learning how to shift from being stressed, being annoyed, being frustrated, and so on, to a more calm approach where you can find solutions instead of seeing problems. I think that's the very first key. And what I also think is really important is to go away from, and that's something that in general, in any kind of interaction, I think very often we think very transactional, like how can I win? But shifting from transactional to relational, how can we both win? And then extending that generosity to someone else, and that being more generous with each other. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's very helpful. I love your recommendations, and the first one about working on yourself. It's great, to be honest. Unexpected. I was in my mind. It's interesting. I was going to think, how do you communicate that in my culture this is important? We need to do this like this. And I love that you actually start by saying, first of all, it's also about working on yourself and your own perception. So that's very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if we shift from the love/personal life and a bit more about the career, because that's also something that gets impacted when we move abroad, usually, hopefully in a good way. And sometimes people move abroad for work, but sometimes not at all. And so I feel like sometimes we can get frustrated if we feel like our career has not been able to reach the level that we wanted because we moved abroad. Like sometimes we don't have a network abroad. We may have an accent. We may have to adapt some skills, or just have to also deal with some cultural differences at work. And how do you support some people who may have frustration related to their career expectations and aspirations that they're struggling to meet abroad?
Yeah. Well, speaking from my own experience also, I think what's really, really important is to have a clear vision on what it is that you actually want, because then you also know a little bit more about where you're going and you can communicate that. And even though that might not be, maybe you have to take a job first that's not really going into that right direction, but it gives you something to work towards, to look forward to. And I think it also gives us self-confidence to have that vision and to know, okay, we are going that direction and we are working towards it. And the second part that really helps here is knowledge about strengths, like knowing what you're good at again, because we cannot get someone else to appreciate our strengths or what we can bring to the table if we're not appreciating it ourselves. So the first step is to have clarity yourself and to really be self-confident about that also, and be proud of what you can bring to the table. And then maybe also be very clear about, okay, because I'm from this and that culture, I do bring these strengths or these personality traits because they're just inherent in my culture, and that's what I can bring to the table when I come and work in this country. So yeah, I think first of all, being proud of ourselves and what we can bring to the table and appreciate it ourselves, because if we don't appreciate ourselves, I don't think others can appreciate it.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Thank you so much. Yes, also kind of work on yourself then first and foremost, and finding the strength within you. So that's great.
And again, I want to add also, and that's back to what we also talked about, again, be patient, because also this is a process. So and if you have that vision and you feel that you're not moving towards it, maybe really also make an effort to appreciate the small tiny steps that you're moving towards that vision. So not expecting these big leaps immediately, but maybe really like celebrate every small step that you take.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this. And without further ado, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the Happy Abroad Summit, how does it work, and who attends, etc.
Yeah. Well, the Happy Abroad Summit, I've hosted it 3 times by now. And I usually invite experts from all over the world who work either directly also with expats or internationals, or who have knowledge in a field that's relevant. So for example, I had a resilience coach once, or a self-confidence coach. And those are things that are really important as expats, as internationals. Those, I call them happiness skills. So the summit is structured in 6 overarching themes, and one of them is happiness skills. One of them, for example, is international intercultural life. So we have a little bit intercultural training there. And one of them is about habits. So there are 6 themes, and the summit is also 6 days long. So every day has a theme with a number of speakers who contribute with their topic to that theme. And participation has so far always been free. And the participants who signed up for the summit really came from all over the world also. So last time I made a list, and participants came from over 90 countries, and there were 1,000 people participating. So it was really great. Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm definitely signing up for next year. That sounds
Yes.
Thank you so much, and I'll make sure to put a link also, of course, to your
Yes.
website and to the summit. And
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
to finish, a question that I really wanted to ask you. I think it's a great way to end. Completely subjective, but what would you say to someone who's hesitating to move abroad, who's been thinking about it, but they're not sure they can do it, or if it's the right decision for them? What would you recommend?
Maybe it's a little bit the same that we already had. What would that give you? Asking what would that give you, and then really ask that question a couple of times. Or why would I want that? And then ask what else? What else? Like just brain dump all the ideas that come up, and then really get into that feeling. How does that feel? Does it feel right or not? Because I think if you're at that spot considering if it might be the right thing to do or not, probably you're not having a specific job opportunity. Because for some people it's also a strategic career step. They have an opportunity turning up in another country, and then they consider, is it a good career step or not? And then actually the decision of the country becomes secondary. The primary idea is like, is that a good career step? But I think what you're pointing to is more, do I want that experience of living abroad? And I think that's mostly like, it's a gut decision, not so much a head decision. Like, do you want these new experiences? Do you want the adventure? Do you want to challenge yourself and see if you can find happiness and create the life you want in a different country? And I think first and foremost, it has to feel right, but you can also use that questioning technique and going deeper, and then like savor that feeling and then see, okay, does it feel right or not?
Yes, fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really nice to meet you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.